Let me tell you a story. It's about what happens when two worlds collide in the kitchen. In one corner, you have the titans of technique, armed with liquid nitrogen and sous vide machines. In the other, you have the guardians of tradition, armed with little more than a wooden spoon and a family recipe. This is the story of a chef from Davao, a chef who was told his humble, traditional Filipino ingredients stood no chance against a celebrated culinary star from Singapore. He was openly mocked for choosing a simple stew in a competition meant to crown the next icon of Asian cuisine. But what the judges and his rival didn't know was that this dish held a secret. A secret that wouldn't just win the contest, but would also move a panel of world-renowned chefs to tears. This isn't just about a cooking competition. It's about pride, identity, and the surprising power of a meal cooked from the heart. So, how did a simple pot of Filipino stew, dismissed as peasant food, manage to upend the entire culinary world? The answer begins with a chef who dared to believe his heritage was his greatest strength. To really get the weight of this showdown, you have to understand the two chefs at its center. On one side stood Clara, a name that basically meant victory on the Singaporean food scene. The kind of polished finalist you'd see on a show like MasterChef, Clara was the embodiment of modern gastronomy. Her style was a dazzling display of precision and art. She painted with foams, sculpted with gels, and deconstructed classic dishes into brilliant, almost unrecognizable new forms. She wasn't just a chef, she was a scientist, a strategist who saw ingredients as variables in an equation. She walked into the kitchen with an air of total confidence, the clear favorite, the Goliath ready to crush any David in her path. To her, tradition was just a starting point, something to be reinvented and left behind in the chase for innovation. On the other side stood Vince, a chef from Davao in the southern Philippines. Vince wasn't a TV star. He hadn't been on the cover of any food magazines. His arena was a small, family-run eatery where the menu was a love letter to the dishes his grandmother taught him. In every sense of the word, he was the underdog. Vince's philosophy was the polar opposite of Clara's. He didn't see ingredients as variables, he saw them as stories. For him, the smell of garlic hitting hot oil wasn't just a step in a recipe. It was the sound of his childhood home waking up. Slow braising meat wasn't a chemical process. It was an act of patience and love passed down through generations. He joined the competition not for glory or money, but for a chance to stand on an international stage and cook the food of his people without apology. His quiet demeanor hid a fierce pride in his roots, and he carried that pride into the kitchen, armed with little more than his worn-out pots and the flavors of home. The event was the Heritage Showdown, designed to celebrate Asia's diverse culinary tapestry. The rule was simple but profound: create one dish that tells the story of who you are and where you come from. It wasn't just a test of skill, but of soul. At the front of the room sat the judges, a formidable trio. There was a French purist, a man who believed flawless technique was everything. Next to him, a renowned food historian from India who could trace the journey of a single spice across centuries. And finally, a celebrated Peruvian chef, a pioneer of fusion cuisine who understood both tradition and transformation. Their approval could change a chef's life. As the chefs grabbed their ingredients, the battle of philosophies took shape. Clara's station looked like a science lab, circulator baths, smoke guns, and strange powders. Vince's station, by contrast, was startlingly simple: a big, heavy-bottomed pot, a cutting board, and a basket of humble produce. He laid out his key ingredients: oxtail, raw peanuts, string beans, eggplant, and banana blossoms. That's when the first shot was fired. Clara, walking past Vince's station, paused. A tiny smirk played on her lips. "Oxtail and peanuts?" she said, just loud enough for others to hear. "How rustic." The jab hung in the air, sharp and heavy. It was a clear dismissal of his choice as simple and unsophisticated. Vince didn't flinch. He just met her gaze, his expression calm, and gave a slow, deliberate nod. "It's my grandmother's recipe," he said softly. The battle lines were drawn. It was innovation versus memory, the star against the unknown, and the clock had just started ticking. As the clock began its countdown, the kitchen became a tale of two worlds. Clara's corner was a blur of controlled energy. She moved like a surgeon, every action precise and calculated. She was deconstructing a classic Singaporean chili crab, transforming it into something brand new. A bright red foam hissed from a siphon. Delicate crab meat, cooked perfectly in a temperature-controlled bath, was flaked into a pristine mound. She was building a mosaic of textures and temperatures, a puzzle for the palate. Meanwhile, Vince's corner was an island of calm. No futuristic gadgets, no dramatic foams, just Vince, his pot, and the steady rhythm of his knife. His process was slow, almost meditative. He started by carefully browning the oxtail, taking his time to build a deep, rich crust. This, he knew, was the foundation of his Kare-Kare. As the oxtail began its hours-long simmer, he turned his attention elsewhere. He started toasting raw peanuts and a bit of rice in a dry pan. A nutty, fragrant aroma began to fill his corner of the kitchen. He explained to a roaming judge that the toasted rice would not only thicken the sauce, but also give it a unique, earthy depth. Then he began the laborious process of grinding them by hand with a mortar and pestle. A blender would take seconds, but Vince knew that grinding by hand kept the oils from overheating, preserving the pure peanut flavor. It was a tribute to the slow, deliberate methods of his ancestors. But Vince's true secret weapon was a small, unassuming jar. His house-made bagoong, a fermented shrimp paste. This wasn't from a store. This was a batch he'd made months ago in Davao, from a family recipe as old as anyone could remember. He explained how his family fermented tiny shrimp with salt under the Mindanao sun, a process that required patience and an intimate understanding of nature. The result wasn't just salty, it was an explosion of umami with funky, briny depths and a subtly sweet finish. This was the soul of his dish, his history, distilled. As the hours passed, Clara began plating, using tweezers to place microgreens on her stunning creation. It was a work of art. The judges nodded, their expressions hinting that the conclusion was obvious. Vince, on the other hand, was still just stirring his thick, orange-hued stew. It looked like he was hopelessly behind. The sleek, modern dish was a picture of perfection, while the humble stew was, well, still just a stew. "Time's up! Hands up!" The frantic energy cut out, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. It was time. Clara went first, presenting her abstract artistic plate. She eloquently explained her concept, talking about flavor profiles and textural contrasts. The judges listened, their faces serious and analytical. The French purist was first to taste. "The technique is flawless," he declared. "The precision is Michelin star level, a remarkable display of skill." The food historian was next. "You've successfully reinterpreted a classic. It's a very clever, thoughtful plate." The fusion expert agreed, praising its innovation. Clara returned to her station with a triumphant smile. The bar seemed impossibly high. Then it was Vince's turn. He carried his dish not on a minimalist slate, but in a simple earthenware bowl. Inside was his Kare-Kare, the rich, peanut-colored stew hugging the oxtail and vegetables. He placed a tiny saucer of his dark, pungent bagoong next to it. Compared to Clara's masterpiece, it looked plain. Vince simply said, "This is Kare-Kare. It's the food I grew up with. Please eat it with a little of the bagoong. It's how it's meant to be." The French chef, looking skeptical, took a piece of oxtail, dabbed it in the bagoong, and took a bite. A long silence followed. The analytical mask he wore began to crumble. His eyes, once sharp and critical, softened. He closed them for a moment. When he opened them, he didn't speak of technique. He uttered a single word, his voice thick with emotion: magnifique. He spoke of the depth, the layers of flavor that only slow, patient cooking could build. Next was the food historian. She took a bite, and her reaction was even more immediate. Her eyes widened, and then, to the shock of everyone, they filled with tears. She wasn't just tasting food, she was tasting a memory. This isn't just a dish," she said, her voice trembling. "This is a story of a family, of a culture. This flavor, it has a soul." She explained that while innovation is exciting, the power in a recipe perfected over generations is simply untouchable. Finally, the fusion master. He looked at Clara, then back at Vince's humble bowl. "Clara," he began gently, "your dish was for the mind. It was brilliant. I admire it. But Vince," he said, turning to him, "your dish, this is for the soul. You didn't just cook us a meal. You invited us into your home." The room was holding its breath. The judges conferred in hushed tones, but their faces told the story. The head judge stepped forward. "In any competition, we look for skill, creativity, and execution," he began. "One chef showed us the future of food, but the other reminded us of its heart." He paused. "The winner of the Heritage Showdown is Vince." A wave of shock rippled through the room, then erupted into applause. Vince stood stunned, tears streaming down his face. He hadn't just won, he had vindicated his belief, his culture, his grandmother's legacy. He dedicated the win to Davao, to the Philippines, and to every home cook who keeps their traditions alive. He said the most important ingredient was pagmamahal, love. But the most powerful moment came after the cameras stopped rolling. Clara, whose expression had gone from smug to shocked to deeply respectful, walked over to Vince. "I don't understand," she said, her voice quiet and genuine. "My dish was perfect." Vince nodded. "Technically it was," he replied. "But food is more than technique, it's feeling. Your dish made them think. My dish, it made them remember." Clara stood there for a long moment. Then she did something no one expected. She bowed her head slightly. "Teach me," she said. It was an admission that for all her technical brilliance, there was a depth to his simple food that she had yet to comprehend. In that moment of humility, her defeat became its own kind of victory. And that's how a story like this becomes a legend. It's a powerful reminder that while innovation dazzles, authenticity resonates. It's about a cuisine too often overlooked on the world stage, finally getting its moment. Vince's story proves that the humblest ingredients, when cooked with passion and respect for the generations that came before, can stand proudly against any dish in the world. In a world obsessed with the next new thing, a simple pot of Kare-Kare reminds us that sometimes the most powerful flavors are the ones that have been simmering for generations. If you believe in the power of food to tell a story, subscribe for more tales from the world's most incredible kitchens, and let us know in the comments what traditional dish from your culture deserves to win the spotlight.